Me and Leroy have a pretty terrifying one for you today. At this point in my life, and down the horror movie spiral, I feel like I've become jaded enough that I just don't feel anything during horror movies. Like, I'm not scared whatsoever, rarely ever creeped out. But let me tell you, Hereditary both scared and creeped me out. I felt something for the first time in forever. But Leroy was unfazed, because he has seen way worse stuff in real life than any horror movie could depict. But without further ado, let's get into it. Hold on to your heads because we're about to begin. In Hereditary, the main characters are Annie, the mom, Steve, the dad, Peter, the son, and then Charlie, the daughter. They are the Graham family, and an extremely lucky family at that. The mom, Annie, is a miniature artist who makes dioramas of little scale rooms, which is honestly the dream career. And the dad is a psychiatrist. And the movie opens with the Graham family going to the funeral of Annie's mother. And at the funeral, Annie is the one presenting the eulogy for her mother, where she's pretty much saying she's surprised there's so many people there because the mother was very closed off and private and knew very little people and kept to herself, even hinting at the fact that Annie was not even close with her mother. And Annie's mother's name, Ellen, or was? Is forevermore named Ellen? I don't know. And it's an open casket funeral, which those always creep me the hell out. I don't like seeing dead people. Like, when I die, not only do I want to be cremated, I want to be, like, burned on the spot. But if I do get stuck with an open casket, at least give me one of those rolled up towels under my neck so I don't have a raging double chin the whole time. Anyway, the vibe at the funeral is that not only the guests, but the Graham family, they're not overly sad or upset or hurt by her death. Because like I said, Grandma Ellen didn't seem really close to anyone in the family, besides Charlie. And at the funeral, we discovered that Charlie, who is their daughter, has a pretty severe nut allergy, so, you know, keep that in the think box for later. And when the Graham family returns home after the funeral of Annie's mother, Ellen, the vibe is kind of like, well, anyway. And they pretty much go about their day as normal. You know, if I died, I would be extremely pissed if no one shed a tear for me. Y'all better be weeping. Not that I want you sad, okay? But just be a little sad for my sake, okay? Okay. Between us. Anyway, around a week later, while Peter and Charlie are at school, all of a sudden a bird hits the window of Charlie's classroom. And the whole classroom is startled except Charlie. She has like no reaction to it. After school, Charlie goes outside the classroom window where the bird's dead body is laying. Then Charlie gets scissors out and then starts cutting off its head. And after the head is cut off, she shoves it in her pocket, stows it away for later. I don't know for what, but we don't need to know for what to know that it's hella disturbing. And that evening, the dad, Steve, gets a call from the cemetery saying that Grandma Ellen's grave has been desecrated, and it's only been a week since her burial. But you know, since Ellen is Annie's mother, Steve decides to keep it to himself, and when his wife asks what the call was about, he's like, oh, it's just, you know, funeral expenses, So yeah, 2 disturbing things in one day. And when it's nighttime, Annie goes out under the guise of seeing a movie to a grief counseling group session where she opens up about her and her mother's estranged, fractured relationship and the fact that her mom Ellen suffered from DID and then later on dementia. Annie also reveals that her father died when she was just a baby due to psychotic depression that led him to starve himself. And Annie goes further to say that her older brother had schizophrenia and ended up hanging himself in their mother's room. The note he left blaming their mom Ellen and accusing her of putting people inside him. And as you can imagine, the therapy group is kind of shocked into stunned silence. They don't know what to say. And then Annie continues on, and she brings up that her and her mother had lost contact for years, up until the birth of her daughter, Charlie, and that the grandma took a special liking to Charlie. The grandma apparently having said that she wished Charlie had been born a boy. The next day, Peter, who is the older brother, he gets invited to a teen party. Woo! I wouldn't know what those are like. And you know what? I'm not sad about that. So he goes to his mom to ask her if he can use her car, except he tells her it's more of a school get-together, like a school barbecue thing, implying that the get-together is put on by the school and not by a group of delinquent juveniles. The mom agrees to let him go as long as he brings Charlie with him, which, you know, is gonna cramp his damn style, because she assumes it's more of a school thing, you know. So in order to get usage of the car, he begrudgingly agrees to bring Charlie with him. And Charlie, at this very moment, is actually outside kind of headed toward the woods because they live in a very wooded area, and she's carrying that decapitated bird head she whooshed earlier, and she's walking towards a distant clearing wherein she sees what looks to be her grandma sitting amongst a row of flame. But then the mom, Annie, comes outside and grabs Charlie, I guess not seeing what Charlie saw, and drags Charlie back inside and tells her, you're gonna be going out with your brother tonight to a school barbecue. And Charlie does not want to go, but the mom is forcing her, so Charlie kind of has to begrudgingly comply, which I know what it's like to be forced to go out into social events, okay? I know. And when Peter and Charlie arrive at the party with all the other school-age degenerates, or at least Peter's same age, not Charlie's, Charlie feels like she's sticking out like a sore thumb because she knows no one there and they're all way older than her and they're all drinking and smoking and doing drugs. And Peter just tells her to go get a slice of cake because he's about to ditch her because he wants to go off and smoke with some girl. So Charlie does end up getting a piece of cake and eating it, except she goes to find Peter afterwards because she's feeling short of breath and starting to panic, and she says it feels like her throat is getting bigger. Given that Charlie has a severe nut allergy, I'm not a betting person, but I would guess that cake had nuts in it, which is kind of ew. So her reaction is worsening by the second and is getting harder and harder for her to breathe, and her throat is closing up. So Peter rushes out of there with her and gets her in the car and then starts racing her, speeding her over to the emergency room. And in a desperate attempt to get some air, Charlie, who's choking and gagging in the backseat, rolls down the window and sticks her head out to try and, force some oxygen in her. And pretty much at that exact same moment as Charlie has her head stuck out the window, and as Peter's going 80 miles per hour, he has to swerve all of a sudden because there's a dead deer in the road. And because of that swerve and the fact that they're going 80 miles an hour and that Charlie's head's outside the window, when the car swerves off the road, it grazes this roadside pole, and bam! Imagine that's Charlie's head, but it comes off. So yeah, Charlie's head gets actually decapitated by that pole. And right after, Peter screeches the car to a stop. He doesn't even need to look back in the back seat or out the back window because he knows what just happened. He knows. So he just stares ahead in absolute stunned shock before slowly putting the car in drive and just slowly going down the road. He knows what just happened and he does not want to witness it. Can you imagine if you were the reason that happened to your younger sibling? Holy hell. At least by this point, it's safe to say that Charlie's gonna have no more breathing issues. And in his traumatized days, Peter pulls up to the house, gets out without looking in the back seat and confirming his worst fears, and just ambles his way inside. He makes his way up into his room and into his bed and lays down just to stare into guilt-induced oblivion for the rest of the night. I don't think he even blinks. And keep in mind that Charlie's body, headless body, is still in the back seat of his mom's car. So in the morning, when the mom goes to use her car, as Peter still lays awake in mental agony, he hears the blood-curdling screams of his mother as she discovers the hellscape in the backseat of her car. Imagine leaving that for your mom to discover, though. I understand he's probably in hella shock, but still. So the mom has to endure this extreme emotional agony and grief, and Peter, the horrific guilt. I don't know how you live with that type of guilt. That's horrendous. Oh my gosh. And all their emotions are just hyper horrific at the actual funeral for Charlie. Oh man. And she was only 13. So afterwards, the family members are in complete shambles, almost beyond the point of being able to function in life in general, but especially around each other. And in the backyard, they had this treehouse that belonged to Charlie, that Charlie stayed in all the time. And so the mom has been sleeping there since Charlie's death with just like a heat lamp on because it's freezing. And still in secret, Annie goes back to that support group, the grief counseling group, or at least just to the parking lot. Because when she pulls up, she kind of gets second thoughts and is about to leave when someone comes up to her car, a woman named Joan, who has been part of the support group for the past couple months. And Joan tells Annie that both her son and grandson died. They drowned. And it was only around 4 months ago at this point. And Annie brings up Charlie's recent death, the death of her 13-year-old daughter, so they have something they can relate on. And Joan gives Annie her phone number, like, call if you need anything or need to talk or want to come over. I'll be there. Annie's not really feeling it, but she takes her number and just kind of speeds off and doesn't go to the group that night. And within the next couple days, even though Annie's a little hesitant and begrudging about it, she calls up Joan and ends up going over to Joan's apartment. And the first thing she notices when she arrives is that the welcome mat that says Joni looks very similar to the embroidered welcome mats that Annie's mother Ellen used to make. And Annie and Joan just kind of start talking about their losses and traumas, and they kind of form a friendship. How sweet. And later, at another tense, horribly uncomfortable family dinner back at the Graham's house, Peter kind of initiates conversation with his mom, maybe the first since Charlie's been killed, which leads up to her going off at him and standing up and screaming at him and probably letting all the grief and anger out at him for the first time since Charlie's death. And if it wasn't contentious and uncomfortable before, then I don't know what you'd call it now, but she kind of just ends up storming out. And the next day, when Annie's at the store, Annie runs into Joan there, where Joan tells her that she's just recently become involved with performing seances. And she swears to Annie that one of the seances allowed her to hear her son's voice. And she kind of forces Annie to come back to her place so she can show her for herself, because Annie's obviously skeptical about it and weirded out. And as Joan is beginning the seance, Annie is still just as skeptical and weirded out and uncomfortable and wanting to leave until things start happening. They both have their hand on a glass and it's all of a sudden yanked away from them across the table. And then Annie feels this rush of air on her and she's really starting to freak the hell out. And understandably, she gets hella freaked out when Joan sets up a chalkboard and a piece of chalk on top, and the chalk starts writing by itself until it writes the words, "I love you, Grandma." So now Joan has contacted her grandson. Now Annie is hella freaked out and shaken and probably re-traumatized. But now I guess she could consider herself a believer, right? And Annie is now in a rush to leave Joan's apartment and get the hell out of there in that situation and the whole seance crap. But before Annie's able to leave, Joan gives her instructions and items and a specific text in another language to read out loud when Annie performs her own seance, and Joan's telling her, "Go do it for yourself, you can talk to your daughter Charlie." So Joan gives her all the stuff she needs to perform a seance, and then Annie rushes the hell out of there. I would have dumped that crap at her doorstep, but Annie takes it with her, because I think deep down she now realizes maybe I can talk to Charlie. It's late at night when Annie goes to wake up Peter and Steve and to bring them downstairs to try and convince them to be part of a seance to communicate with Charlie, which is reopening all sorts of wounds. But they need to be there because Joan told them that everyone in the house has to be present. Peter and Steve are very wary and weirded out by Annie's erratic behavior and the implication of a seance, but she finally convinces them to cooperate and participate in the seance. They are very begrudging though, especially Steve, but I think they also both become immediate believers when the glass they're touching slides away on the table, a glass cabinet shatters, and then the candle in front of them blows up like a blowtorch. So Peter and especially Steve, they're like, "What the hell is this? What are you doing, Annie? Like, what have you done?" And it somehow gets even worse when Annie seems to become possessed by the spirit of Charlie, even having her voice, and in Charlie's voice, crying out for her mom and asking what's happening, "Where is everyone?" and "Peter, is that you?" and just re-traumatizing everyone so horribly. And Annie continues speaking in Charlie's voice and as Charlie until Steve comes over and splashes water in her face and wakes Annie back up. And Annie is completely confused and unaware as to what just happened. See, this is why I do not mess with seances. I don't touch that stuff. Not with a 10-foot pole. And the next day, while Peter is in school, things are a little off with him. At one point, he even sees his reflection smiling back at him. So something's a little strange. Something changed after that seance the night before. And Steve gets a panicked phone call from Peter, who's at school still and in the middle of an absolute breakdown, telling his dad he's being threatened by some sort of vengeful spirit who's after him. So the dad is extra pissed at Annie for doing that seance and for the effect it's had on Peter. Peter's in his room in bed trying to go to sleep. If he can sleep amongst all this havoc, I don't know. And that's when he hears Charlie's tongue cluck sound. Charlie used to do that all the time when, she was alive. But this time he hears it coming from the corner of his room, and he looks up to see Charlie standing there before her head drops off and rolls on the floor, which turns out to be a basketball. So after calming down, he's like, "Oh, it's just all in my head," until his head is grabbed and he's dragged back onto the bed and his head is being actively tugged. But it turns out to be his sleepwalking mother, who has a whole history of disturbed sleepwalking behavior, and she doesn't realize that she was just doing that, tugging and pulling at his head. So she goes back into Charlie's room. Annie sees Charlie's old sketchbook open on her bed, except the pages are flipping by themselves, and each drawing is a distressed face of Peter with his eyes X'd out. And there are multiple drawings of him. She goes downstairs and lights a fire and flings the notebook or sketchbook into the fireplace, except as she does, her sleeve catches fire. Is that sketchbook hexed? Keep in mind that this is the sketchbook they used to summon Charlie during the seance, so yeah. I think we should ask Leroy. Leroy knows a thing or two about hexes. So Annie's starting to catch fire herself until she retrieves the sketchbook from the fireplace and then pats it out, stamps out the fire, and then the fire on her own body goes away thereafter. The next day, given the events of last night, Annie rushes over to Joan's apartment for some answers, since, Joan apparently knows a lot more about the seance crap and what potentially could have gone wrong and what's happening to them now. But Annie's not there, or at least she doesn't answer her door. But the camera view moves inside Joan's apartment, where we see a kind of hex, occult, satanic ritual set up on Joan's table, and right at the center is a picture of Peter. So that's probably not a good thing, is it? And we shortly find out where Joan actually is, because back at Peter's school, as he's sitting out in the courtyard, Joan is across the street, calling out Peter's name and that she expels him and "Get out!" and yelling things in other language and freaking Peter the hell out. So after not finding Joan at her apartment, Annie rushes back to her own house and goes through her mother's old belongings, and she finds some disturbing occult-looking books, stuff on the dark magic and the dark arts. And one of the occult books she finds in her mother's old belongings, it has a section highlighted talking about a King Payman and the process of him possessing and taking over a chosen host. and the rituals needed to execute the full process of possession of this host. And it also says that this King Payman is looking for a male host, a male body, because King Payman is a male spirit or male demon or whatever the hell he is. So things aren't looking great for Peter. That was my first takeaway. And Annie also finds a box of the embroidered rugs that her mom Ellen used to make, and they look identical to the one that's outside Joan's apartment. And confirming her suspicions, Annie finds a scrapbook from her mother Helen, where it includes photos of Ellen with Joan and a bunch of other creepy looking people at what looked like ritualistic meetings, partaking in actual rituals, and she sees her actual mom doing that. But look who's right there with her mom in all those rituals. Joan. So Joan is way more involved than we ever could have guessed from the beginning. Shady as hell. Not to mention that some of the ritual photos taken, which are you supposed to take photos during a ritual? Like, it's a heyday little fiesta. Anyway, one of them involves a framed photo of the Graham family, Annie's family, on the wall. Like, above the altar, involved in the ritual. And Annie, who is still upstairs and still in discovery mode, trying to unbury and unearth all her mother's copious amounts of secrets and horrendous type secrets. She goes to open up the attic because there's more of her mother's belongings stored up there. And right as she does, she's met with the most horrendous smell and the buzz of millions of damn flies. So I think we can guess what that means, right? And when Annie actually goes up into the attic, where the smell is actually gut-punching, she finds the actual dead body of her mother Ellen on the attic floor with a candle by her feet. And it's been several weeks, so that body is rotting. And upon a little closer inspection, where she rounds the bend a little more, she sees that her mother's body is actually headless as well. Headless. Decapitated. And she didn't go into the ground that way. So I guess not only was her grave desecrated and unburied, but her body was also taken. Oh. All the while, back in school, Peter's being pursued and tormented and affected by something that's been following him, to the point where he, like, seizes up in class, like, which reminds me of that. It reminds me of that one scene from Riverdale. Oh my god.
Maybe she's having a seizure.
Anyway, he, like, seizes up and gets the most horrific expression on his face. I don't even know if you can call that an expression, but it looks like he's being squished by something or forced, or there's some type of force around him. And his teacher takes note of it, and his classmates, right before Peter starts smashing his head against his desk a couple times, and then shoots back and kind of snaps out of it and is screaming. So Steve, who, you know, is a psychiatrist, so he's off at work, he gets a call at work, probably from the school or maybe the hospital that Peter was brought to, and he has to go pick Peter up and bring him home. And Peter's in the back seat with the bandage on his broken nose and unconscious, maybe passed out from whatever sedatives they gave him. And Steve looks worn the hell out. And understandably so. He's going through so much, and it seems like his wife is going absolutely crazy, and everything is just collapsing around him, and he lets it out a little bit in the car with a quick cry. So Steve drives Peter home, and Annie's in a tizzy because, you know, what she just saw in the attic. Let's be real, that's understandable too. But she gets even more frazzled when she sees Peter, and it's like, what the hell happened to him? He gives her a quick explanation, and they carry Peter's unconscious body inside and put him in bed. And that's when Annie is freaking out and telling her husband Steve that my mother's dead, decapitated body is in the attic. And to be fair, she sounds absolutely crazy. And that is exactly what Steve is thinking in that moment. But she's telling him, I swear she's up there. Steve, go look for yourself. I need you to see it. Please, Steve. As if Steve hasn't been through enough already. But begrudgingly, he complies. And he goes up into the attic, and he indeed does see the mother's body for himself. So when he comes down from the attic completely freaked out and disturbed, Annie starts explaining her findings about Joan and her ties to her mother, and their occultist ties, and their occultist rituals, and all that world. That evil, dark, horrible world that I don't want to be part of. And Annie's also telling Steve that the seance that Joan pushed and persuaded her and encouraged her to do, it may have been more than a seance, and they may have been tricked into creating some sort of pact or something horrible like that. And all the while, Steve looks so out of it. Like, oh my gosh. He's listening to Annie go on and rambling on about all this stuff, and he kind of interrupts her to say, you went and dug up your mother's corpse, didn't you, and put it in the attic. Like, you need help. Because he believes she's just off the deep end after Charlie's death. And Annie's a little hurt and frustrated that he's not listening to her. And she continues on saying that that seance they performed however many nights ago in the house, that it was something more than a seance. And she worries that that little special text that was in another language that Joan had her read at the seance was something more than that. And that they were tricked into initiating some type of demonic pact that is now coming after Peter. And that's where Annie shows Steve the notebook or sketchbook of all those creepy drawings of Peter with all his eyes X'd out. And she tells Steve, whatever this is, it's coming for Peter. And she tells Steve that she tried to burn the sketchbook earlier, but that when she did, she went ablaze. But now she's begging him to go and burn it, so it's like, do you want him to burn or something? She's begging him to do it. She's like, please, Steve, just throw it in the fire, get rid of it once and for all. So sick of her ramblings and beggings, he finally agrees, but as he walks over to the lit fireplace to throw the sketchbook in, he kind of bows out like, honey, you really need help, you're really sick. And frustrated that he bowed out, Annie rips the sketchbook from him and throws it into the fireplace, except this time Steve burns, even though Steve did not throw it in, and he gets engulfed in flame. And she's watching in absolute stunned horror shock until this look overcomes her and her expression just kind of dulls out. And it looks like she just got possessed by something. Maybe the same thing that's trying to get to Peter. A few hours later, Peter wakes up in his bed and it is now nighttime and he's kind of confused and dazed and his nose is really sore. And he looks out his bedroom window to see that there's the heat lamp on in the treehouse and there's a light shining on the treehouse. And right at that very moment, what looks to be his mother scamper floats behind him, scurries in the air. Oh, that irked me so good. Oh. And he leaves his room calling out for his parents, and the whole house is dark and it seems no one is home until he hears a few crashes and bangs from somewhere deeper into the house. And as Peter makes his way downstairs, he sees that a lot of the furniture is upended and knocked over, and he also sees his father's charred, burnt body right by the fireplace. He gets closer to it to get a better look, I guess, and is absolutely horrified. And we see his mom, Annie, crouched up near the ceiling behind him, watching. But Peter has no idea that she's there, or it's not even really his mom at this point. And that's when Peter turns to see a completely butt-naked old man standing in the doorway with the creepiest smile on his face. Ew, so like, what, all the cult members are communing here? What? And Peter barely has time to react before his possessed mother starts bolting after him and chasing him. So as Peter is being chased by his mother, he manages to get up into the attic and pull up the ladder and lock himself in, and then he hears his mother banging on the latch from underneath, except we realize she's banging with her head because she's currently crawling on the ceiling. I'm not gonna lie, this scene is a little funny. And also disturbing as hell. So understandably, Peter is scared straight holy hell. I don't know how you don't die of absolute fright. I think everyone's heart would give out by this situation, but now that Peter's locked in the attic, he glimpses around the room and it probably stinks like hell in there and there's still flies. And he looks over to the spot where, I guess he doesn't realize, but where his grandmother's body used to be. You can see the outline of where his grandma used to be, and it's surrounded by lit candles, and in the center there's a picture of him, a picture of Peter with the eyes poked out or gouged out of the photo. What a horror house. Like, oh my gosh, what a horrible situation. It just never ends. And although he's freaked the hell out, he's just trying to convince himself that he's still asleep and he's in a nightmare and he's like, wake up, please wake up. Until he hears this wet, ooey gooey noise coming from above him, where he looked up to the rafters to see his mother hanging there while simultaneously trying to cut her own head off with a piano wire, all the while staring and making aggressive eye contact with him. Like, and still staring, she aggressively speeds up the sawing. And then Peter looks over to the corner where he sees 3 more completely butt-naked cult members, old people as well, standing there watching with little smiles on their face. And he gets so freaked out by the whole situation or everything or the horrible state of his life that he leaps out the attic window and he tumbles out to the garden bed below and subsequently passes out when he hits the ground because that's quite a fall. And as he's passed out in the garden bed, we see this little light force or light orb descend and go into his body. And right then, as that light goes into him, into his body, whoosh, Peter awakens and stands up, and he's got this dull, kind of glazed look over his face. And he gets up right in time to see his mother's now headless body floating its way up into the treehouse. And I'm not gonna lie, this image, this scene right here, it's funny as hell. It low-key kind of kills the creepy aspect because it's so stupid. Anyway, don't worry, the suspense builds right up real quick. And Peter looks a little off. And at this point, we're pretty sure there's something possessing him, and the fact that there is something off with him is confirmed when he clucks his tongue, just like Charlie used to do. Trance-like, Peter ambles his way over to the treehouse, passing by various nude cult members waiting and watching in the tree line as he goes by. Also, why are most of the cult members old? I guess occultism is a popular hobby to take up once you retire? I don't know. And when he climbs up the treehouse ladder, we're met with another horrendously disturbing scene. Because as Peter enters the treehouse, we see a group of cult members up there already and bowing. And they're all in the nude, except one. And they're all bowing to this creepy mannequin dummy type figure with Charlie's literal head on top. That's being made up to look like a king of sorts. And somehow it gets worse. Because there, bowing at the mannequin's feet, is the headless body of his mother and the rotting, disgusting body of his grandmother. You know, both obviously dead, but posed to be bowing. And in the background, there's this creepy building, suspenseful, kind of radiating type music, which makes the scene all that more horrifically creepy and ew. So if we weren't sure that Peter is now overtaken and possessed by something, potentially King Payman, we are now, because he has no reaction to the horrible scene but like, a look of appeasement, kind of like, my majesty. I mean, he doesn't say that, but his expression is saying it. And he looks especially appeased when one of the cult members gets up and puts a crown on his head. And then a voice out of shot starts speaking to him. A voice we recognize to be Joan's. We don't see her, but we damn hear her. And she refers to Peter as Charlie, and that Charlie has now become King Payman, one of the 8 kings of hell. And Joan, still out of shot, tells King Payman that they have corrected his first female body and have now given him his preferred male host. So Charlie was possessed by King Payman before? I mean, she had all the tongue clucking and everything going on. How long did that go on? How long was Charlie possessed? And then Joan starts singing King Payman's praises and asking for wealth and prosperity, etc., all that crap, before all the surrounding cult members start chanting, "Hail Payman! Hail Payman!" And then it cuts to black. Thank goodness. I actually saw this movie years and years back when it first came out. I guess it wasn't that long ago. I think it came out 2018. But that was before I was ever, into horror movies, but especially before I was ever into movies. Look how red my hand is from holding Leroy's fat ass. But anyway, at the time I wasn't really a movie person or a horror movie person, and I ended up really not even liking Hereditary the first time I saw it and thinking it was kind of dumb and goofy. Probably because I didn't really get it and didn't understand all the backstory to it and what was actually happening the whole time, that would help. But now watching it again for the first time in so many years, it's actually a fantastic horror movie. It is perfectly horrifying in all the right horror movie ways. And I don't know what my past self was thinking. I don't know. Because it really got me this time. And again, I'm someone who does not feel anything from horror movies because I think I've seen too many. I feel like I'm just someone who doesn't have a reaction to movies in general. Because, they're through a screen. It's not real, so my brain can't get past that barrier. But it managed to scratch the barrier with Hereditary, because there were some scenes that genuinely irked me so deeply, right to my core. And I love when a horror movie can do that. And Hereditary, it came through, it delivered. A little too much. But watch this movie for yourself, preferably in the dark and preferably alone if you want the full horror experience. And let me and Leroy know what movie you want to see next.